According to Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports, he reports that the Big 12 is looking to continue their conference expansion by possibly adding 6 teams from the Pac-12. These teams are reported to be Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. Now, myself, along with many others out there, thought that after USC and UCLA left the Pac-12 for the Big Ten, that Washington and Oregon would be following them in their footsteps. But according to many reports out there, the Big Ten has no further interest in expansion until after Notre Dame makes a decision to either join their conference or remain an independent. Now, the Pac-12 is about to negotiate their new media rights deal with Fox and ESPN. Their current media rights deal is set to expire in 2022. The Big 12's media rights deal, however, doesn't expire until the year 2025. Now, when you look at what these potential 6 teams could bring to the Big 12, Utah, we know that they have a long-standing rivalry with BYU. It's called the Holy War. So that's going to bring a little bit of intrigue to this conference. Also, Utah is a program that is on the up. They have been really good over the last couple of seasons over Kyle Whittingham. You look at Arizona and Arizona State. By adding them, the Big 12 can expand into the Phoenix market. And then Washington and Oregon have been really great football programs over the past decade. Both of them have both appeared in the college football playoffs. And they have pretty solid markets for the Big 12 to expand into. You look at Washington, they're around the Seattle area, so you can expand into that market, which is pretty huge. You also have Oregon. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but both Washington and Oregon were recently ranked inside of Go Bacon Rate's most valuable college football programs based on their 3-year average revenue prior to the 2021 college football season. Washington ranked 19th on that list at $92 million, and Oregon was tied for 15th with Florida State at $96 million. So these are 2 valuable programs that will bring a lot to the table for the Big 12. And even though the Big 12 may not be as recognizable as a conference when it comes to brand recognition, such as the Big Ten and the SEC, because the Big Ten has schools like Ohio State, Michigan, the SEC has Alabama. But I think that the Big 12 could be a pretty viable option if certain schools who are trying to get into the Big Ten or the SEC can't get in. I think the next best thing would be the Big 12. And for those of you guys who are college basketball fans, without a question, the Big 12 is going to have the best conference in all of college basketball. Now, also, you look at the fact that you already recently added Cincinnati, BYU, UCF, and Houston not too long ago. So I think that the Big 12 conference has a lot of potential. You look at the fact that UCF is located in Orlando. You have a lot of theme parks, a lot of amusement parks. So that is going to bring in a lot of NIL opportunities for potential recruits, which should benefit UCF recruiting. Then you look at the fact that Houston is in the state of Texas. We already know how much money runs through the state of Texas. So with Houston being in the Big 12, it should increase their revenue. And then you got Cincinnati, who has showed a lot of promise. They have also, along with Washington and Oregon, have appeared in the college football playoffs. And BYU has a really big fan base, one of the more underrated fan bases in college football. And a lot of people overlook BYU. But you got to think about it. There's a reason why BYU Stadium sits 60,000 people. And you look at Arizona, Arizona State, a lot of people for a while have viewed those 2 programs as sleeping giants, programs that have a lot of potential because of the geography and the fact that they have a pretty good, easy access to recruiting in California. You also have some pretty good high school players who come out of that state as well. And then plus you have a huge alumni base. So if Arizona State or Arizona could find the right head coach, those are two programs that could have a good amount of potential in this conference as well. But what about Colorado? Because Colorado is the program that often a lot of people look at this report and they kind of overlook. They probably say, JT, what can the Big 12 do with Colorado? Well, Colorado has already been in the Big 12 conference before. So with them returning back to this conference, it allows the Big 12 to get back into that Colorado market, probably in the city of Denver, which Denver is really big when it comes to football fandom, and also the state of Colorado in general. So for Colorado, the Buffs, you get into the Big 12, and that's also going to give them a little bit more recognition, because when they left the Big 12 for the Pac-12, they never really became bigger from a name recognition standpoint. So the Big 12 should help them out in that department. And also, you're probably going to get more revenue. Now, for the Pac-12, if you're a fan of that conference, if this happens, then the conference is screwed. Because what's going to happen with Washington State, Oregon State, is just not really going to be enough to keep the conference alive. And even if you do add a school such as San Diego State or Boise State, the conference still is going to be done because there's really not going to be no intrigue. And if Washington and Oregon leave, it's wraps. So I think the best thing for the Pac-12, if this does end up falling through, probably would be to either merge with the conference, either try to merge with the Big 10 or the Big 12. And most likely, it would be merging with the Big 12 because it looks as if the Big 10 is only interested in getting Notre Dame. And then after that, they're trying to acquire some other teams. So for the Big 12, this is a conference that is going to be really stable. For conferences that can't cut it in the Big 10 or the SEC, this would be the next best thing. So I think that the Big 12 is doing a lot of good things. I think they're doing a really good job of trying to stay alive in this crazy world that we're living in now of college football, because we don't really know what's going to happen. Because there's some reports circulating around that the SEC could look to snag Miami, FSU, and Clemson from the ACC. And I think that the ACC most likely will be the next conference that gets raided. But for the Big 12, you got to give a round of applause to their commissioner for keeping this conference alive. Because when Texas and Oklahoma bolted for the SEC, many people thought that the Big 12 was done. But despite losing two of the biggest brands in college football, the Big 12 was able to find a way to survive. So a lot of applause for the Big 12. I'm interested in seeing if this ends up holding up, because if you add Arizona and Arizona State, that is going to increase your reach on the West Coast. And then adding Washington, Utah, Oregon, I feel kind of would be the cherry on top. And if you're able to get a couple of more schools, such as Oregon State, then you bring Oregon's rivalry along to the conference as well, which also is going to have some intrigue, because even though Oregon State isn't one of the biggest schools when it comes to name recognition in the world of college football, you know, there still are fans out there who do enjoy watching Oregon State and Oregon play. And when you look at all of this conference realignment, there are going to be some rivalries that are going to end up getting left out. And a lot of people are just going to overlook them and say, you know what, nobody really cares about Oregon and Oregon State, JT. Yeah, you may not care, you may not watch it, but I promise you that there are a lot of former alumni from both Oregon and the University of Oregon State who love watching that game. So I'm hoping that the Big 12 is able to make this deal happen. And for the Pac-12, it looks like things are starting to get even worse. And then I was also reading a article that was talking about the potential revenue deal that the Pac-12 is going to have. Now, if UCLA and USC would have stayed, their expected revenue deal was expected to be somewhere around 500 million. And with those two programs leaving this conference, it went down from an estimation of 500 million to 300 million. So things are not looking good for the Pac-12, which is why it's important that they're able to keep Oregon and Washington happy, because if they leave, then everybody else leaves. What about Stanford and Cal? You know, the Big Ten also has some interest in Stanford, because if they get Stanford, they think that it may boost up Notre Dame's interest in joining the Big Ten, because then you keep that rivalry. And not only do you have that rivalry with Notre Dame, but you also have the rivalry with USC. So let me know how you guys feel about the potential further expansion of the Big 12 acquiring these 6 Pac-12 schools.